The chandelier cast fractured light across 300 faces, none of them looking at her. Moreo Aluko stood pressed against the service corridor wall, silver tray balanced on trembling fingers, invisible in her black uniform among a sea of silk gowns and tailored suits. Then the room fell silent. Not gradually. Not politely. Completely. She felt him before she saw him, a shift in pressure, like the air had been commanded to behave differently. Kim Woo-jin stood at the top of the marble staircase, and even from 40 feet away, his gaze found her. Only her. The snake tattoo coiling up the side of his neck seemed to pulse under the light. His voice cut through the silence like a blade wrapped in velvet. Who let the staff stand where the guest should be? 300 heads turned. Every single eye landed on Moreo. This story explores how fate connects us to people we were never meant to meet, and how love sometimes begins in the most humiliating moments of our lives. Please like, share, and subscribe. 3 hours earlier. The service elevator groaned as it climbed toward the 63rd floor of the Hanjin Grand Hotel, Seoul's most exclusive venue for those whose names moved markets and toppled governments. Moreo adjusted her collar for the 7th time, catching her reflection in the polished steel doors. 27 years old. 5 years removed from a life she'd buried so deep she sometimes forgot it existed. Stop fidgeting. Mrs. Park, the catering supervisor, didn't look up from her clipboard. Tonight's guests include ministers, ambassadors, and at least 4 families whose combined wealth exceeds Nigeria's GDP. Moreo's jaw tightened at the casual dismissal of her homeland, but she said nothing. Invisible. That's what you need to be. The Hanjin Group's annual charity gala, Mrs. Park continued. Chairman Kim Woo-jin hosts personally. He notices everything, especially mistakes. The name landed like a stone in still water. Kim Woo-jin. Moreo's fingers curled around the tray's edge. She knew that name. Everyone in certain circles knew that name, and the shadows that followed it. The elevator opened onto controlled chaos. Florists argued over centerpiece placement. Sound technicians calibrated hidden speakers. Servers in identical black uniforms moved like synchronized ghosts through a ballroom designed to make ordinary people feel small. Moreo had once attended events like this. As a guest. Station 12. Mrs. Park pointed toward the far corner. Champagne service. Stay near the wall. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't make eye contact with guests. Don't exist. Moreo took her position, muscle memory guiding her movements as she arranged crystal flutes on the velvet-lined tray. The ballroom was a cathedral of wealth, 60-foot ceilings, hand-painted murals depicting Korean mythology, and windows overlooking Seoul's glittering skyline. Every surface whispered money. Every shadow held secrets. She'd learned to read rooms like this when she was 17, trailing behind her father at diplomatic functions in Abuja, Lagos, London. Before everything burned. First guests arriving, someone announced through the staff earpieces. Moreo pressed her back against the silk-covered wall and became a shadow. The room filled slowly, then all at once. Politicians with practiced smiles. Heiresses dripping in diamonds that could fund hospitals. Tech moguls who looked barely older than university students but commanded empires. And wives. So many wives, each one a carefully curated accessory, positioned to enhance their husband's image without overshadowing it. Moreo circulated with mechanical precision, offering champagne, avoiding eyes, disappearing between heartbeats. Heard the chairman's been in a mood since the Macau deal. Wouldn't cross him tonight. That tattoo gives me chills. The whispers followed her like smoke. Kim Woo-jin hadn't arrived yet, but his presence saturated the room anyway. People positioned themselves based on where he might stand. Conversations tilted toward topics he might overhear. A man in his 50s, finance minister, Moreo's memory supplied, stepped directly into her path. Champagne. Not a request. A command. She offered the tray, keeping her gaze fixed on the middle distance. His hand bypassed the glasses entirely, fingers closing around her wrist. Nigerian. Moreo's heart stumbled. Yes, sir. Thought so. His grip tightened. There's something about African women. Exotic. Like collecting rare art. Don't react. Don't react. Don't. The 1987 Satanzas, minister. A junior server appeared, presenting a different tray with practiced smoothness. The minister's attention shifted, his grip loosening just enough for Moreo to extract her wrist and step back. She retreated to the shadows, pulse hammering against her throat. Invisible. Stay invisible. But she could still feel where his fingers had pressed, a reminder that in rooms like this, some people existed only to be consumed by others. 8:47 p.m. The room's energy shifted. Moreo felt it in her spine before she understood it, a collective intake of breath, a subtle straightening of postures, a gravitational pull toward the main staircase. He's here. The crowd parted like water before a ship's prow, revealing the man who descended the marble steps with the unhurried pace of someone who had never needed to rush in his life. Kim Woo-jin. 37 years old. 6'2". Built like a weapon disguised as a businessman. His suit was black, not navy, not charcoal, but the absolute absence of color. Custom-tailored to accommodate shoulders that suggested violence held carefully in check. His hair was swept back from a face that could have been carved from stone, high cheekbones, a jawline sharp enough to cut, and eyes so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The snake tattoo on his neck coiled upward from beneath his collar, its tail disappearing into his hairline, its head resting just below his ear. In certain light, it seemed to move. He surveyed the room with the detached interest of an emperor inspecting his domain. And found it adequate. Chairman Kim. An older man, one of the Samsung heirs, approached with hand extended. A magnificent evening. Woo-jin accepted the handshake with precisely 3 seconds of contact. No more. His response was too quiet for Moreo to hear, but whatever he said made the Samsung heir laugh nervously and step back. The crowd flowed around him, seeking his attention while pretending they weren't. Moreo watched from her corner, professional curiosity mixing with something older. Something bitter. She'd known men like this before. Men who wore power like a second skin. Men who collected people the way others collected art. Her father had been one of them. Before he wasn't. Need a refill at Station 7. The earpiece crackled, pulling her from her thoughts. Moreo gathered her tray and moved toward the service corridor, grateful for any reason to put distance between herself and the room's new center of gravity. She didn't notice the dark eyes that followed her movement. 9:23 p.m. The gala reached its crescendo. A string quartet played something mournful and elegant. Waiters circulated with the precision of a military operation. The minister who'd grabbed Moreo's wrist held court near the bar, his wife standing 3 feet away, smile fixed like a mask. Moreo had retreated to the corridor between service stations, a narrow passage hidden behind decorative screens, invisible to guests but offering a clear view of the ballroom floor. She was counting the minutes until her shift ended when the screens shifted. Kim Woo-jin stood 3 feet away. Up close, he was overwhelming. Not just his height, though he loomed over her by nearly a head, but his presence. The air around him felt compressed, charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. His eyes traveled down her uniform, across her face, and back up again. Assessing. Cataloging. Deciding. The snake tattoo seemed to writhe in her peripheral vision. You're out of position. His voice was quiet. Low. The kind of voice that didn't need volume to command absolute attention. Moreo's throat constricted. I was retrieving additional. You were hiding. Not an accusation. An observation. She forced herself to meet his gaze, and the impact stole her breath. His eyes weren't just dark, they were laid. Bottomless. Like looking into a well and realizing it went down forever. Something flickered in their depths. Recognition? Impossible. I was resting briefly before returning to my station, Moreo said, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. I apologize if I've violated protocol. A muscle twitched in his jaw. The snake tattoo shifted with the movement. Nigerian. Her stomach dropped. Yes. Lagos or Abuja? The question was so unexpected that she answered before thinking. Abuja. Originally. Stupid. Stupid. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Originally. It wasn't a question, but it demanded an answer anyway. I've lived in several places since then. Running from something. The accuracy of it hit her like a physical blow. She felt her mask crack, just slightly, just enough for him to see. And God, he saw. His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Interest? Calculation? Something hungrier? Chairman Kim. A voice interrupted from somewhere behind him. The Minister of Trade is asking. Tell him to wait. The words were calm. Absolute. No one argued. But when Woo Jin turned back to Moreo, she was already gone, disappeared through the service corridor like smoke through cracks. He stood in the empty space she'd occupied, breathing in the faint trace of shea butter and something floral. His jaw tightened. Running. The word settled into his mind and stayed there. 10:15 p.m. Moreo's hands shook as she restocked the champagne station. What was that? She'd served dozens of events. Hundreds. She'd learned to navigate powerful men without catching their attention, without registering as anything more than a convenient function. But the way he'd looked at her. Like he was trying to read the chapters she'd torn out of her own story. Moreo. She jumped. Mrs. Park stood beside her, expression pinched with displeasure. Station 3 needs additional coverage. The heiress hosting the charity auction specifically requested. She paused, eyes narrowing. Are you ill? You look pale. I'm fine. Then move. The auction begins in 15 minutes, and the chairman will be presenting the final item personally. Of course he will. Moreo gathered her tray and crossed the ballroom floor, weaving between guests who didn't see her. Station 3 was positioned near the elevated stage where the auction would take place, uncomfortably close to the front, uncomfortably visible. She took her position and tried to disappear into the wall. 45 minutes. Just survive 45 more minutes. The auction was a theater of excess. A Josianera vase sold for $3 million. A private island in the Philippines went for $7. A painting by an artist Moreo had never heard of, but whose work apparently hung in the Louvre, reached $12 million before the bidding even heated up. And through it all, Kim Woo Jin sat in the front row, watching. Not the items. Not the bidders. Her. Moreo felt his attention like a physical weight, pressing against her shoulders, making her hyper-aware of every movement. The way she shifted her weight. The way she breathed. The way she very carefully did not look in his direction. Why? Powerful men didn't notice servants. It was one of the few reliable rules of the world she'd learned to navigate. But every time she risked a glance toward the front row, those dark eyes were already waiting. The snake tattoo on his neck caught the stage lights, gleaming like living ink. And now, the auctioneer announced, voice swelling with practiced drama, the final item of the evening. Presented personally by our host. Kim Woo Jin rose. The room fell silent. He climbed the stage steps with lethal grace, each movement economical and precise. When he reached the podium, he didn't smile. Didn't perform. He simply existed. And commanded attention by the sheer fact of his presence. The final item, he said, voice carrying without amplification, is not an object. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. It is a commitment. He paused, letting the words settle. Hanjin Group will match all donations made tonight. The crowd stirred with appreciation. With one condition. His eyes swept the room. And stopped on Moreo. The person who wins the highest bid will join me for a private dinner. Not as a business meeting. Not as a networking opportunity. The murmurs grew louder. But as a conversation between equals. The statement was absurd. No one in this room was his equal. The offer itself was worth more than every item auctioned combined. Access to Kim Woo Jin, unfiltered and personal. Bidding erupted instantly. 2 million. 5 million. 10. Moreo watched the numbers climb with mounting dread. Something was wrong. Something was. $15 million. The room went quiet. All heads turned toward the bidder. Minister Park. The man who had grabbed her wrist. He stood with his paddle raised, smile sharp and possessive. For an evening with Korea's most eligible CEO? A bargain. Polite laughter scattered through the crowd. Kim Woo Jin's expression didn't change. The bid stands at 15 million. His eyes found Moreo again. Held. Going once. The minister preened. Going twice. And then Woo Jin did something no one expected. He smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't friendly. It was the smile of a predator who'd just realized his prey had wandered exactly where he wanted. Sold. he said, to myself. Chaos erupted. The minister's face purpled. You can't. I can. Woojin's voice cut through the noise like ice. As host, I retain the right to match any bid. 30 million to the Children's Hospital Foundation. The crowd gasped. And the dinner, his gaze locked onto Moreo with such intensity that she felt it in her bones. Will be with a guest of my choosing. Silence. Absolute, crystalline silence. Then he raised his hand. And pointed directly at her. 300 faces turned toward the service wall. 300 pairs of eyes found the woman in the black uniform, standing frozen with her silver tray, trapped in the crosshairs of Korea's most powerful man. Moreo's heart stopped. No. No, no, no. The young woman from the catering staff. Woojin's voice carried across the silent ballroom. Please. Join me. It wasn't a request. The crowd parted like water, not for her, but away from her, as if proximity might contaminate them with whatever had attracted the chairman's attention. Moreo's legs refused to move. Mrs. Park's voice hissed through the earpiece. What did you do? Nothing. I did nothing. But she could feel the weight of every gaze pressing against her, some curious, some jealous, most confused. The minister's face had twisted into something ugly. The heiresses whispered behind jeweled hands. The politicians calculated how this moment might be leveraged. And through it all, Kim Woojin waited. Patient. Absolute. Inevitable. Moreo set down her tray. Her hands didn't shake. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. She walked toward the stage with her spine straight and her chin level, wearing her dignity like armor forged from years of surviving worse. Because she had survived worse. The crowd's whispers followed her like flies. Who is she? Just staff. Some kind of game. Nigerian, I think. Must have done something. She climbed the steps. Kim Woojin extended his hand. Up close, she could see details the distance had hidden. A small scar bisecting his left eyebrow, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his jaw held tension like a wire about to snap. His hand waited. She didn't take it. Instead, she clasped her own hands behind her back and met his gaze directly. You want a show? Fine. But I won't perform. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe. Or appreciation. He lowered his hand without comment and turned to address the room. This evening has been an overwhelming success. His voice carried the practiced weight of a man who'd given hundreds of speeches. Thank you all for your generosity. Dismissal. The crowd stirred, murmurs rising as the social machinery began to turn. But no one moved. Not really. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Woojin turned back to Moreo. Come with me. Not a request. But she was done following orders from men who thought they owned her. No. The word landed like a bomb. The whispers exploded into gasps. Someone dropped a glass. The minister actually laughed, a sharp, delighted sound. Woojin's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air around him. Pressure. Warning. No, he repeated, quiet. I'm working. Moreo kept her voice steady. My shift ends at midnight. Until then, I have responsibilities. A muscle twitched in his jaw. The snake tattoo seemed to coil tighter. Your responsibilities, he said slowly, have changed. Changed how? You no longer work for the catering company. The words hit her like ice water. He couldn't. As of this moment, you are a guest of Hanjin Group. Your salary will be matched for the duration of this event, plus compensation for any inconvenience. Your supervisor has already been informed. Moreo's heart hammered. He planned this. She didn't know how. She didn't know why. But the precision of it, the timing, the announcement, the fact that Mrs. Park's voice had gone silent in her earpiece, told her everything. This wasn't impulse. This was a trap. I don't accept. Woojin's eyes narrowed. I wasn't asking. And I wasn't accepting. The tension between them crackled. The crowd had gone utterly silent, watching like spectators at a blood sport. Then, impossibly, Woojin smiled. Not the predator's smile from before. Something smaller. Almost genuine. Come with me, he said again. Please. The please changed everything. Not because it softened the command, it didn't, but because it revealed that he knew how to be soft when he chose. And he was choosing. For her. Why? Moreo studied his face, searching for the trap, the angle, the inevitable betrayal. She found nothing but those bottomless eyes and the inexplicable certainty that her life had just split in two, before this moment and after. 1 hour, she said finally. Then I leave. Agreed. He offered his hand again. This time, she took it. He led her through corridors she hadn't known existed. Behind the glittering ballroom lay a labyrinth of private passages, servant halls converted to executive escape routes, hidden elevators with biometric locks, rooms that didn't appear on any public blueprint. Moreo catalogued each turn, each door, each potential exit. Old habits died hard. You're memeizing the route. His voice startled her. She hadn't expected him to notice. Professional hazard. You're a caterer. Not a spy. I'm a survivor. Same skill set. He glanced at her, something unreadable passing through his eyes. They stopped before a set of carved wooden doors, traditional Korean design, incongruous with the modern hotel surrounding them. My private office, he said. Soundproofed. No cameras. No staff. Is that supposed to comfort me? I should be terrified. Are you? Moreo met his gaze. I've survived worse than powerful men in soundproofed rooms. Something dark moved through his expression. I know. The words hit her like a fist. He knows. But before she could respond, he pushed open the doors and gestured for her to enter. The room beyond was unexpected. She'd anticipated cold luxury, chrome and leather and the sterile aesthetic of corporate power. Instead, she found warmth. Wood-paneled walls lined with books. Low lighting from paper lanterns. A traditional Korean floor seating area surrounding a low table. And everywhere, art. Not the ostentatious pieces from the auction, but quieter things, a calligraphy scroll that looked centuries old, a collection of Celadon pottery, and mounted on the far wall, unmistakably Nigerian, a bronze Benin plaque. Moreo's breath caught. You collect African art. I appreciate history. He moved to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of something amber. Some histories more than others. She approached the plaque slowly, hypnotized by its familiar contours. A warrior figure, intricate and proud, cast in bronze by artisans whose skill had stunned European colonizers 5 centuries ago. This belongs in a museum. It belonged to your father. The world tilted. Moreo spun to face him, heart slamming against her ribs. Woo Jin stood motionless, holding both glasses, watching her with that terrible patience. What did you say? Chief Adebayo Aluko. He spoke the name with careful precision. Diplomat. Art collector. One of the wealthiest men in Nigeria until his death 8 years ago. His collection was scattered when his estate was, he paused, choosing the word. Dissolved. Moreo's vision blurred at the edges. He knows. He knows everything. Why do you have my father's art? I bought it. He set down one glass on the table and kept the other. Legally. At auction. Shortly after your family's misfortune. Misfortune. Such a clean word for what had happened. Her father, accused of crimes he didn't commit. Their assets frozen. The trial that never happened because he died, heart attack, the doctors said, though everyone knew better. Her mother, broken by grief, vanishing into the countryside of her birth. And Moreo, 20 years old, suddenly stripped of everything, money, status, safety, identity, and forced to become someone else entirely. You knew who I was. Her voice came out strangled. Tonight. When you found me in the corridor. I've known who you are for 3 years. The admission hung in the air like smoke. 3, she couldn't breathe. Why? Why do you care about a dead diplomat's daughter? Woo Jin moved closer. In the intimate space of his office, he seemed even larger. The snake tattoo on his neck gleamed in the lamplight, its inked scales seeming to shift with each breath. Because, he said quietly, I'm the one who destroyed your father. Moreo's fist connected with his jaw before her mind caught up. The impact sent pain rocketing up her arm, but Woo Jin barely moved. Just turned his head slightly, absorbing the blow like a wall absorbing rain. A red mark bloomed on his cheek. Feel better? He asked, voice unchanged. You murdered him. I destroyed his reputation. Woojin set down his glass with precise care. The accusations. The frozen assets. The trial that would have ended in prison. Yes. That was me. Moreo's chest heaved. Why? Because your father killed my brother. The words landed like stones in still water. Brother. She searched her memory frantically, her father's business dealings, his diplomatic connections, his enemies, but found nothing. No brother. No Kim. You're lying. I'm not. He moved to his desk and opened a drawer, removing a photograph. Park Sung-ho. My half-brother. Different father, same mother. He worked as a translator for the Nigerian embassy in Seoul. June 2014. He discovered your father was using diplomatic pouches to smuggle conflict minerals and threatened to expose him. He held out the photograph. A young man smiled at the camera, mid-20s, gentle eyes, the kind of face that belonged in a classroom, not a conflict. 2 weeks later, he was dead. Car accident in Lagos. Except the car had been tampered with. And the only person who benefited from his silence was Chief Adebayo Aluko. Moreo's legs gave out. She sank to the floor, photograph clutched in trembling hands, staring at the face of a man she'd never known. A man her father had allegedly killed. No. The word came out broken. My father wouldn't. Your father was a smuggler. A fixer. A man who built his fortune on other people's suffering. Woojin's voice was ice. I have documentation. Shipping manifests. Financial records. Testimony from men your father worked with. He was a diplomat. He was a monster wearing diplomat's clothing. The room spun. Moreo had spent 8 years mourning a man she thought was innocent, a victim of political enemies, of corporate jealousy, of the corruption that consumed everyone around him. But what if? No. She looked up at Woojin through burning eyes. Why are you telling me this? Why not just let me live in ignorance? Because I need you to understand what comes next. He crouched beside her, bringing them to eye level. This close, she could see the fractures in his composure, the rage he'd been carrying for a decade, the grief he'd transmuted into calculated destruction. I ruined your father because he deserved it. But you, his voice shifted, something raw bleeding through. You were collateral damage. I didn't know about you until later. Until it was done. And that's supposed to make it better. No. He reached out, and his fingers brushed her jaw with impossible gentleness. It's supposed to explain why I've been watching you. Why I bought your father's art. Why I learned your aliases, tracked your movements, made sure you were never in danger. Moreo recoiled from his touch. You've been stalking me. Protecting you. From what? From the people who wanted to finish what I started. His words settled like ice in her stomach. Your father didn't work alone. His partners, the men who actually ran the smuggling operation, they blamed your family when the network collapsed. They've been searching for you. And your mother. Mother. Moreo's heart stopped. Where is she? Safe. A village outside Port Harcourt. I've had people watching her since the beginning. You had no right. I had every right. Something dangerous flared in his eyes. Your father took my brother. I could have taken everything from his family in return. Instead, I chose mercy. I chose to let you survive. This isn't mercy. Moreo's voice shattered. This is control. This is, she struggled to her feet, needing distance. You've been playing God with my life for years. Yes. The admission was unapologetic. Absolute. And you'll continue. Yes. Even if I refuse. You can't refuse. He rose, towering over her. The people hunting you, they found your trail. Lagos, 3 months ago. London, 6 weeks ago. Seoul, his jaw tightened. 2 days ago. The timeline clicked into place. The charity gala. The job that appeared out of nowhere. The assignment that placed her exactly where he could find her. You orchestrated this. Her voice was hollow. The job. The event. Tonight. I needed to bring you in before they could reach you. Bring me in for what? Woo Jin's eyes met hers with terrible intensity. Protection. Until I've eliminated every threat. He paused. And after that? After that, you'll let me go? His silence was an answer. Woo Jin. I don't know. The admission seemed to cost him. I've spent years watching you from a distance. Telling myself it was obligation. Guilt. Duty to repair what I'd broken. He moved closer, and she retreated until her back hit the wall. But standing in that corridor tonight, seeing you up close, his hand rose, pressing flat against the wood beside her head. I realized the truth. Which is? His voice dropped to a murmur. I don't want to let you go. Moreo didn't sleep. Woo Jin had installed her in a suite adjacent to his office. Luxury imprisonment in silk sheets and designer furnishings. Guards stood outside her door. Not obviously, but she'd heard their footsteps. She lay in the massive bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile two versions of her father. The man who'd carried her on his shoulders through the gardens of their Abuja estate. And the monster who might have killed a young translator for knowing too much. Which one was real? At 3 a.m., she gave up on sleep and rose to explore her gilded cage. The suite was larger than the apartment she'd shared with 3 other women in Itaewon. Marble floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Han River. A closet already stocked with clothes in her exact size. More evidence of Woo Jin's surveillance. She found a bottle of whiskey in the bar and poured 3 fingers, drinking it in the dark. The door opened without warning. Woo Jin stood silhouetted against the hallway light, still dressed in his gala suit, tie loosened, the snake tattoo stark against his throat. You should be sleeping. You should be knocking. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I own this building. And I'm a guest. Not a prisoner. Are you sure about that? The question hung between them. Moreo lifted her glass. Want one? Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe, but he moved to join her at the window. She poured a second glass and handed it over, careful not to let their fingers touch. They drank in silence, watching the city lights shimmer against the water. My brother would have liked you. The words came unexpectedly, rough-edged. He collected strays. Defended underdogs. Believed people could change. And you don't. I believe people are what they do. Not what they say. Not what they intend. He turned to face her. Your father's actions made him a murderer. My actions make me a puppet master. A survivor. His eyes glittered in the darkness. Same as you. Moreo studied his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders, the way he held his glass like a weapon rather than a comfort. You didn't have to tell me, she said quietly. About my father. About any of it. You could have kept me ignorant and controlled. I could have. So why didn't you? He was quiet for a long moment. Because you deserved the truth. He turned to face her fully. And because if I'm going to keep you, if you're going to be part of my world, it can't be built on lies. Keep you. The words should have been terrifying. Instead, they struck something deep in her chest, a hunger she'd buried years ago, when she'd learned that being wanted by powerful men usually meant being destroyed by them. But Woo Jin wasn't looking at her like she was a prize to be won. He was looking at her like she was a fire he couldn't stop reaching for, even knowing it would burn. I haven't agreed to anything, she said. I know. I might still hate you. I'd understand. And if I try to leave? His jaw tightened. I'd stop you. Then I am a prisoner. He exhaled sharply. You're the only person in 10 years who's made me question my own certainty. The admission cracked something open between them. Moreo set down her glass and stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. What do you want from me? Really? His hand rose slowly, giving her time to retreat. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her cheek, the same impossible gentleness from before. Everything, he said quietly. And that terrifies me. The kiss happened between one breath and the next. She didn't know who moved first. Maybe they moved together, pulled by the same gravitational force that had been building since he'd found her in that corridor. His lips were softer than she'd expected. His hands, when they gripped her waist, trembled almost imperceptibly. The snake tattoo pressed against her palm as she touched his neck. This is insane, she thought. This is revenge. This is trauma. This is. His tongue swept against hers, and thinking stopped. They broke apart gasping, foreheads pressed together, breathing the same charged air. This is a terrible idea, Moreo whispered. I know. You destroyed my family. Yes. And I should hate you. Do you? She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes, those endless dark pools that had been watching her for years. I don't know what I feel. Except that it's dangerous. And I've spent my whole life running from dangerous things. Then stop running. His grip tightened. Stay. Let me protect you. Let me. Control me. Have you? The rawness of the word made her breath catch. For how long? I don't know. His thumb traced her lower lip. I've never wanted anything beyond what I could strategize. But you're outside every plan I've ever made. And I don't know how to handle that. Moreo's heart was racing, her body still humming from the kiss, her mind screaming warnings she couldn't ignore. She stepped back. His hands dropped to his sides. I need time, she said. To think. To process. I understand. I'm not saying yes. I know. But I'm not saying no either. Something shifted in his expression, hope, maybe, buried under layers of control. Get some sleep, he said quietly. Tomorrow, we'll discuss what comes next. He turned and walked toward the door. Woojin. He paused without turning. The people hunting me, how dangerous are they? His shoulders tensed. Dangerous enough that I've spent 2 years preparing for this moment. And if they find me before you're ready? He turned, finally, and the look in his eyes was nothing like the controlled businessman who'd commanded the gala. It was something older. Darker. The look of a man who had built himself from grief and rage and would burn the world before he let it touch what was his. Then they'll learn what happens when you threaten something I've decided to protect. The door closed behind him. Moreo stood in the darkness, heart pounding, trying to understand how a single night had unraveled everything she thought she knew about her past, her future, and herself. The next 3 weeks existed in a strange limbo. Moreo remained in the Hanjin Grand Hotel, no longer in the small suite, but moved to an entire floor, complete with private staff, a personal security detail, and more luxury than she'd experienced since childhood. Woojin had given her freedom to move within the building, access to books and entertainment, anything she requested. Everything except the ability to leave. She saw him every evening. He would arrive at precisely 7 p.m., knock once, a concession he'd made after their first argument about boundaries, and spend 2 hours in her company. Sometimes they talked, about art, about history, about neutral topics that skirted the wounds between them. Sometimes they sat in silence, working through files he'd brought to help her understand her father's crimes. The evidence was damning. Shipping manifests showing diplomatic pouches routed through conflict zones. Financial records tied to shell companies. Testimony from men her father had worked with, smugglers, warlords, politicians with blood on their hands. And the accident report for Park Sung-ho. The car's brake lines hadn't failed, they'd been cut. The mechanic who'd done the work had disappeared 2 days later, but before he vanished, he'd told someone a name. Aluko. Moreo read it all with a detachment she hadn't known she possessed. The man I mourned. The father I loved. The monster he might have been. On the 14th night, something shifted. Woojin arrived at his usual time, but instead of files, he carried a small velvet box. Moreo eyed it warily. What's that? A gift. He set it on the table between them. Open it. She didn't move. What kind of gift requires that level of ceremony? The kind that acknowledges you've spent 2 weeks reading documentation that destroys your image of your father without breaking. That takes strength. I wanted to recognize it. She studied his face, searching for manipulation, finding only that strange patience he always wore around her. Slowly, she reached for the box. Inside, nestled in black silk, lay a gold pendant, a small eagle in flight, wings spread wide. The style was unmistakably Nigerian. It was your mother's. Woojin's voice was quiet. She sold it in Lagos, about 5 years ago. I tracked it down. Moreo's throat closed. She remembered this pendant. Her mother had worn it every day of Marayo's childhood, claiming it brought good luck. The day she'd stopped wearing it, the day Marayo realized it was gone, had been the day hope officially died. Why? The word came out broken. Because it belongs with you. She looked up at him through burning eyes. This doesn't fix anything. I know. It doesn't make you less of a monster. I know that too. Then why? Because I want to give you things. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as her. I've spent years watching you struggle, survive, rebuild yourself from nothing. I've wanted to help. And I couldn't, because you didn't know I existed. Now you do. And he stopped, jaw working. You what? I don't know how to want things without trying to control them. His voice dropped. You're teaching me that I might have to learn. Marayo stared at him. The pendant felt warm in her palm, weighted with memory and meaning. This is manipulation, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. It's an offering. He rose and moved toward the window, giving her space. You can reject it. Throw it away. I won't take offense. Instead, she clasped it around her neck. The gold settled against her collarbone, a familiar weight she'd missed without knowing it. Thank you. He turned, surprise flickering across his features. You're welcome. They stood in silence, the air between them charged with something neither of them could name. Then Marayo did something she hadn't planned. She crossed the room, rose onto her toes, and kissed his cheek. It wasn't the desperate kiss from that first night. It was softer. Deliberate. Acknowledgement. When she pulled back, his eyes were closed, and a muscle jumped in his jaw. Marayo. I'm not forgiving you. She stepped back. I don't know if I ever will. But I'm acknowledging that you're not exactly what I assumed. His eyes opened. Dark. Intense. Hungry. What am I? Complicated. She managed a small smile. Like me. The gala invitations arrived on the 20th day. Woo Jin studied them with displeasure, the snake tattoo on his neck seeming to writhe as his jaw tightened. The Kim family ball, he said. My mother's side. Annual obligation. Marayo looked up from her book, a biography of Korean ceramicists, borrowed from his office. And this is a problem because my family doesn't know about you. And attendance is mandatory for anyone staying in Hanjin properties. She understood the implication immediately. You want to introduce me? I have to introduce you. The alternative is explaining why I've kept a Nigerian woman on a private floor for 3 weeks, which would raise questions I'm not prepared to answer. So I'm, what? Your guest? Your girlfriend? I haven't decided yet. Excuse me. He looked at her fully, something dangerous in his eyes. If I introduce you as a guest, you're vulnerable to speculation. As a girlfriend, the word seemed to cost him. You'd have my protection, but also my family's scrutiny. You're worried about what your family thinks. I'm worried about what my family will do. Marayo set down her book. What does that mean? My mother is a traditionalist. She's been arranging marriage meetings for me since I turned 30. My cousins resent my position in the company. And he stopped. You're what? My ex-fiancé will be attending. The words dropped like stones. Ex-fiancé. I didn't know you were engaged. I'm not. Not anymore. The arrangement ended 2 years ago. Why? His jaw tightened. She found someone else. The simplicity of the statement hid depths of pain Marayo could recognize. She'd been abandoned too, in different ways. And she'll be at this ball? Yes. With her new husband. He paused. My younger cousin. Ah. The picture clarified itself. Family politics, old wounds, a ball designed to showcase loyalties and alliances. You want me as armor, she realized aloud. His expression shifted. I want you by my side. Whether that's armor or, he stopped, something vulnerable flickering beneath the surface. I've never brought anyone to a family event. Not once. The fact that I want to bring you. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The ball was held at the Kim family estate, a sprawling traditional compound in our outside Seoul, transformed for the evening into a winter wonderland of ice sculptures and silk hangings. Moreo had spent hours being prepared by a team of stylists Woojin had hired, her natural hair styled in intricate braids, her makeup subtle but striking, her dress a deep red hanbok modernized with contemporary cuts that showed her shoulders and the gold pendant resting against her collarbone. She looked like someone who belonged at this event. She felt like an imposter. Woojin met her in the lobby, and for a long moment, he simply stared. He wore a black suit, as always, but this one was different. Subtle Korean design elements, a slight sheen to the fabric that caught the light. The snake tattoo on his neck was fully visible, coiling up toward his ear. "You're beautiful." The words were simple. Absolute. Moreo felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It's just clothes." "It's not the clothes." He offered his arm. "Are you ready?" "No." She took his arm anyway. "Let's go." The Kim family estate was a battlefield disguised as a celebration. Moreo read the dynamics within minutes. The careful positioning of family factions, the weighted silences between certain relatives, the way everyone's eyes tracked Woojin's movements. He was the crown prince, and they were all waiting to see him stumble. "Woojin." A woman's voice, musical and cold. They turned. She was beautiful, Korean, mid-30s, dressed in a white gown that made her look like a ghost. Beside her stood a younger man with Woojin's jawline but softer features. "Minute Young." Woojin's voice betrayed nothing. "J1. Congratulations on your anniversary." The ex-fiancé and the cousin. Minute Young's eyes slid to Moreo with barely concealed curiosity. "And who is this? I don't recognize her." "Moreo Aluko." Moreo answered before Woojin could. "I'm here with the chairman." "With him?" Minute Young's smile sharpened. "How interesting. Isn't it?" Moreo matched her smile. "But then, Woojin has always been interesting. I imagine you remember." The temperature dropped 10 degrees. J1 stepped forward, placing a possessive hand on Minute Young's waist. "Cousin. We should catch up later. Your mother's been asking about the Macau expansion. Tell her I'll find her after the toast." Woojin's grip on Moreo's arm tightened. "If you'll excuse us." He steered her away before Minute Young could respond. "That was unnecessary," he murmured. "That was exactly necessary." Moreo glanced back to find Minute Young watching them, her expression calculating. "She was testing me. I needed to show I could bite back." "You're not here to fight my battles." "Then why am I here?" He stopped walking, pulling her into an alcove hidden by silk hangings. The space was small, intimate, and his body heat pressed against her awareness. "You're here because I wanted you here." His voice was low. "Because standing in that ballroom without you felt wrong." "Because," he stopped, frustration flickering across his features. "I don't know how to explain it." "Try." "You make me feel present." The admission seemed to cost him. "I've spent my whole life strategizing, controlling, planning 10 steps ahead. With you, I'm just here. In the moment. And I don't know what to do with that." Moreo's heart stuttered. "That's terrifying," she whispered. "I know. For both of us. I know that too." She reached up, her fingers brushing the snake tattoo on his neck. He went very still. "What does it mean?" she asked. "The snake." "Renewal." His voice was hoarse. "My brother had one, on his back. A reminder that we could shed our pasts and become something new. After he died, he swallowed. I got this. To remember. And to remind myself that survival requires leaving pieces of yourself behind. Even pieces you loved. Especially those." Her fingers traced the ink, following it up toward his ear. His eyes darkened. "Moreo." "What?" "If you keep touching me like that, I'm going to kiss you. And I'm not going to stop." The warning sent electricity down her spine. Would that be so bad? It would be exactly what Minute Young wants to see. Drama. Scandal. Proof that I've lost control. "Have you?" His hand caught her wrist, stilling her fingers. "You know the answer." She did. Because she'd lost control too, somewhere between the documentation of her father's crimes and the pendant around her neck and the way he looked at her like she was the only solid thing in a world made of smoke. "Tonight," she said quietly. "We survive tonight. And tomorrow." Tomorrow, I tell you everything. Everything. The people hunting you. My plans to destroy them. The role I need you to play. He released her wrist. Everything. Moreo nodded slowly. Then let's survive tonight. They stepped out of the alcove together. And across the ballroom, a man Moreo didn't recognize watched them with cold, calculating eyes. His name was Victor Okonkwo. Moreo didn't recognize him at first, just another face in the sea of wealthy guests, another man in a tailored suit. But Woo Jin's hand tightened on her arm the moment they made eye contact. We need to leave. What? Why? Don't look at him. Woo Jin's voice was ice. Smile. Act natural. Move toward the east exit. Moreo forced her features into calm, even as her heart hammered. Who is he? Victor Okonkwo. One of your father's former partners. The one who's been hunting you for 3 years. Oh God. How did he find me? I don't know. A muscle jumped in Woo Jin's jaw. I'm going to find out. They moved through the crowd with practiced calm, Woo Jin nodding at guests, Moreo maintaining her smile, both of them aware of Victor's gaze following them like a physical weight. The east exit led to a private courtyard, empty, lit by paper lanterns, surrounded by high walls. The moment the doors closed behind them, Woo Jin released her and pulled out his phone. Report. Now. A voice crackled through the speaker. Moreo couldn't hear the words, but Woo Jin's expression darkened with each syllable. Understood. Lock down the West Wing. No one leaves without my authorization. He ended the call and turned to face her. He's not here alone. 3 associates, positioned at each exit. Moreo's stomach dropped. This was a trap. No. Woo Jin's eyes were calculating, not panicked. This was opportunity. Someone told him you'd be here tonight. I need to find out who. Your family. Possibly. His jaw tightened. Probably. Woo Jin. I need you to stay here. Don't move. Don't make noise. Security will arrive in 60 seconds. Where are you going? To have a conversation with Victor Okonkwo. That's insane. You said he's dangerous. I'm more dangerous. He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. Trust me. Just this once. Can you do that? Moreo stared into those dark, bottomless eyes. She'd spent 3 weeks reading the documentation of his sins, the calculated destruction of her family, the cold precision of his revenge, the ruthlessness that had built his empire. But she'd also seen the way he touched her. The way he looked at her. The way he tracked down her mother's pendant because he wanted to give her something that mattered. Yes, she whispered. I trust you. Something fierce flashed in his eyes. Then he kissed her, hard, desperate, possessive, and was gone before she could breathe. The security team arrived as promised, 4 men in black suits who positioned themselves around the courtyard without speaking. Moreo waited in the cold, the pendant heavy against her chest, trying not to imagine what was happening inside. Minutes passed. 10. 20. The sound of a gunshot cracked through the night. Moreo lunged toward the doors, but 2 guards caught her arms. Miss Aluko. You need to stay here. Let me go. Chairman's orders. Another shot. Then another. Then silence. Moreo's heart was in her throat, her lungs burning, her eyes locked on the doors that wouldn't open. Please, she prayed to gods she'd stopped believing in. Please don't let him be. The doors burst open. Woo Jin strode through, blood splattered across his white shirt, his face a mask of cold fury. Behind him, 2 guards dragged Victor Okonkwo's body. Not dead, Moreo could see his chest rising, but injured, bleeding from the shoulder, unconscious. Get her to the car. Woo Jin's voice was flat. Now. Woo Jin. Now. A guard took her arm, gently, but firmly, and led her toward a waiting sedan. The last thing she saw before the doors closed was Woo Jin standing over Victor's body, the snake tattoo gleaming with blood, his eyes holding a darkness she'd never seen before. They didn't speak during the drive. Moreo sat in the back seat of the sedan, watching the city lights blur past, trying to process what she'd witnessed. He shot a man. For her. The hotel suite felt different when they arrived, smaller somehow, despite its luxury. More intimate. like the walls had contracted to hold only the two of them. Woojin went straight to the bathroom. Moreo followed. She found him at the sink, scrubbing blood from his hands with mechanical precision. His jacket was gone, his shirt ruined, the snake tattoo stark against skin that seemed paler than usual. Are you hurt? No. The blood. Okonkwo's. His voice was flat. And a guard. He'll survive. Moreo stepped closer. What happened? Victor came prepared for negotiation. I wasn't interested in negotiating. You shot him. I shot him in the shoulder. Woojin met her eyes in the mirror. If I'd wanted him dead, he'd be dead. The clinical assessment should have horrified her. Instead, she felt something more complicated. Fear, yes, but also a dark satisfaction that the man who'd hunted her for years was now bleeding in a Hanjin holding cell. What happens now? I find out who told him about tonight. Then I eliminate every remaining threat. He turned to face her, water dripping from his hands. And then I make you an offer. An offer? Marriage. The word hung in the air like a blade. You're joking. I never joke about protection. His eyes were intense, unwavering. Married to me, you'd be untouchable. My resources become your resources. My name becomes your shield. No one would dare move against you. And in exchange, you stay. The simplicity of it stole her breath. You're asking me to marry you, a man who destroyed my family, because you want me to stay? Yes. That's insane. Probably. You could have any woman in Korea. Any woman in the world. I don't want any woman. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. I want you. Why? Because you fight back. His hand rose, cupping her face. Because you see me clearly, not the chairman, not the monster, but whatever I am in between. Because standing next to you feels like coming home, and I haven't had a home since my brother died. Moreo's eyes burned. That's not love. That's obsession. Maybe. His thumb traced her cheekbone. But isn't love just obsession that's learned to be gentle? She had no answer for that. Because the truth was, she felt it too. The pull, the gravity, the inexplicable certainty that their fates had been tangled together long before either of them understood it. I can't answer you tonight. Her voice was barely a whisper. It's too much. Everything is too much. I know. He released her face but didn't step back. Take whatever time you need. I'm not going anywhere. What if I say no? Something painful flickered across his features. Then I'll still protect you. Still keep you safe. He stopped. I'll survive. I've survived worse. But you won't let me go, she thought. Even if I say no, you'll never really let me go. The terrifying thing was how little that thought frightened her anymore. 3 days after the shooting, Moreo found the files. She hadn't meant to snoop. Woojin had given her access to most of his office, and the drawer had been unlocked. Inside, photographs. Hundreds of them. Her, at 17, smiling at her father's side during a diplomatic reception. Her, at 22, working as a waitress in a Lagos restaurant. Her, at 25, sleeping on a park bench in London because she couldn't afford rent. Her, last year, crying outside a convenience store in Itaewon after a customer had screamed at her for spilling coffee. He'd been watching her every moment. You found them. She spun. Woojin stood in the doorway, expression carefully neutral. You have photographs of me sleeping. Her voice shook with fury. Photographs of me crying. Photographs from moments when I was completely alone and vulnerable, Anne. I needed to make sure you were safe. This isn't safety, this is surveillance. It's both. His calm infuriated her. She threw the files at him, photographs scattering like wounded birds. You're sick. You're obsessed. You've been stalking me for years and pretending it's protection. It was protection. You watched me sleep. I watched you survive. Something cracked in his composure. Do you know how many times I wanted to intervene? How many times I watched you struggle and knew I could make it stop with a single phone call? Then why didn't you? Because you didn't know me. The words exploded from him, raw and bleeding. Because I was the man who destroyed your father, and I I couldn't bear the thought of you looking at me the way you're looking at me now. Moreo's chest heaved. And yet here we are. Yes. His voice dropped to a whisper. Here we are. The silence stretched between them, filled with years of secrets and surveillance and the complicated weight of what they'd become to each other. I need to leave. Moreo's voice was hollow. I need space. I need. You can't. Watch me. She moved toward the door, but he blocked her path. The remaining threats haven't been neutralized. Victor was the tip. There are others. If you leave this building, you're vulnerable. I'm vulnerable here. She met his eyes. To you. The words landed like a blow. Something shattered behind his gaze, the careful control he'd worn like armor since the moment she'd met him. I would never hurt you. You've been hurting me for 8 years. Moreo. No. She stepped back. I need time. Real time. Away from you, away from these walls, away from, her voice broke. I can't think when you're near me. I can't separate what I feel from what you've made me feel. He stood motionless for a long moment. Then, slowly, he stepped aside. The East Wing has a separate entrance. Private. I'll assign a security detail, but they'll stay out of sight unless you're in danger. Moreo stared at him. She'd expected a fight. Resistance. More control. Instead, he was letting her go. Why? She whispered. Because you asked. He met her eyes, and the rawness there made her breath catch. And because keeping you against your will would make me exactly what you accused me of being. He turned and walked to the window, putting his back to her. Go. Take whatever time you need. When you're ready to talk, if you're ever ready, I'll be here. Moreo gathered herself, her dignity, her confusion, her complicated feelings, and walked out the door. She didn't look back. But as the elevator doors closed, she caught a glimpse of him standing at the window, the snake tattoo stark against the city lights, and for just a moment, he looked completely alone. Moreo has left. Kim Woojin is alone. Victor Okonkwo is in custody, but unnamed threats remain active. The marriage proposal hangs unanswered. And somewhere in the shadows, the people hunting Moreo are making their next move. The safe house was nothing like the luxury she'd left behind. A modest apartment in Mapojiu, 3rd floor, no elevator. Clean but sparse, a bed, a desk, a window overlooking a back alley where restaurant workers smoked between shifts. Moreo stood at that window for hours, watching the smoke rise and dissipate, trying to understand how she'd arrived here. 8 years ago, you were a princess. 3 weeks ago, you were invisible. Now you're something in between, protected, pursued, desired by a man who's either your salvation or your destruction. The security detail Woojin had promised materialized in glimpses, a car parked too long at the corner, a jogger whose route never varied, a delivery driver who seemed to have no deliveries. They never approached. She could have believed they weren't there at all. Days passed. Moreo tried to establish a routine. Morning tea. Reading. Walking, always within the approved perimeter, always aware of the invisible eyes. Evening meals prepared in the tiny kitchen, tasting nothing. She thought about her mother, safe in that village outside Port Harcourt, watched by other invisible guardians. She thought about her father, the hero of her childhood, the monster of her adulthood. She thought about Woojin. Always about Woojin. His hands on her face. His voice in the darkness. The way he'd stepped aside when she'd asked him to, even though every line of his body had screamed against it. I would never hurt you. You've been hurting me for 8 years. The conversation replayed on an endless loop, and each time, she found new complications. He had hurt her, there was no denying that. The destruction of her family, the death of her father, even if her father had deserved it, the years of anonymous surveillance. He'd shaped her life without her knowledge or consent. But he'd also protected her. Saved her from men who wanted her dead. Given her back her mother's pendant. Looked at her like she was the first real thing he'd seen in years. Can obsession become love? Can love survive knowing what it grew from? On the 7th day, someone knocked at the door. Moreo tensed, hand reaching for the knife she'd started keeping nearby. It's me. A woman's voice. Unfamiliar. Moreo checked the peephole and found a striking Korean woman about her age, dressed simply, carrying a paper bag. I'm Lee Sejin. The woman held up the bag. I brought tteokbokki. And answers, if you want them. Answers to what? To who Kim Woojin really is. And why you might want to go back to him. Sejin was Woojin's cousin, his mother's sister's daughter, one of the few family members who didn't resent his position. Most of them see him as competition, she explained, setting out containers of food that Moreo hadn't realized she was desperate to eat. Or an obstacle. But I remember who he was before. Before what? Before Sung-ho died. Sejin's expression softened. They were inseparable, you know. Different fathers, but it didn't matter, they were brothers in every way that counted. When Sung-ho was killed, something in Woojin just closed. Moreo thought of the snake tattoo. The way he controlled every emotion. The layers of darkness behind his eyes. He never grieved, Sejin continued. He planned. Investigated. Built his empire specifically so he'd have the resources to destroy whoever had hurt his brother. By the time he found out about your father, he was already a weapon. Yes. Sejin met her eyes. But weapons don't fall in love. Weapons don't bring strangers to family events. Weapons don't let people walk away. Moreo's throat tightened. He's not letting me walk away. He has people watching me constantly. That's protection. That's control. Maybe. Sejin leaned forward. Or maybe it's a man who spent 8 years watching you from a distance, telling himself it was guilt, and then finally had to admit it was something else entirely. And what's that supposed to mean? It means he loves you. Sejin's voice was gentle. In his broken, complicated, probably unhealthy way, he loves you. And the reason I'm here is because he hasn't slept in a week, and the company's starting to notice, and if you're going to break his heart, I need you to do it cleanly. So he can at least start to heal. Moreo sat very still. Break his heart. She hadn't thought of it that way, that her leaving could hurt him. He was so controlled, so impenetrable. The idea that he was suffering felt impossible. But then she remembered his face at the window. That terrible loneliness. The rawness when he'd let her go. I don't know what I want, she admitted. That's okay. Sejin reached out, touching her hand. But while you're figuring it out, don't forget that he's human too. Underneath all the armor. 2 days after Sejin's visit, everything changed. Moreo woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of breaking glass. She was on her feet before conscious thought kicked in, knife in hand, back pressed against the bedroom wall. Footsteps in the main room. 2 sets. 3. Not the security detail. They would have announced themselves. Her phone was on the nightstand, too far to reach without crossing the intruder's line of sight. Think. Survive. Move. The window. She crossed the room silently, easing the frame open as quietly as possible. The fire escape was rusty but solid. 3 floors down. She could make it. A hand closed around her ankle. Moreo screamed, or tried to. Another hand clamped over her mouth, cutting off the sound. Miss Aluko. A man's voice, accented. Nigerian. Victor Okonkwo sends his regards. They dragged her back into the apartment, and the world became chaos. She woke to pain. Her wrists were bound. Her head throbbed. Blood dripped from a cut above her eye, she didn't remember receiving it. The room was unfamiliar. Industrial. The smell of rust and old machinery. Warehouse. 3 men stood in the shadows, watching her. The closest one stepped forward, tall, heavy-set, a scar running across his jaw. You look like your father. His accent was Lagos, educated. He always thought he was smarter than everyone else too. Look where it got him. Moreo forced her voice to work. What do you want? Information. And leverage. He smiled without warmth. Kim Woojin has been very protective of you. That makes you valuable. He'll come for me. We're counting on it. The man crouched beside her. See, Victor was supposed to negotiate. But your boyfriend complicated things. So now we're taking a different approach. Which is? Trade. His eyes glittered. You for everything Woojin has on our operations. Plus $50 million. Plus a public apology for what he did to Victor. He won't. He will. The man's smile widened. Because I've seen the way he looks at you, Miss Aluko. He'll burn his empire to the ground before he lets you suffer. Moreo's heart hammered. She thought of Woo Jin, calculating, controlled, always 10 steps ahead. And she thought of the look in his eyes when he'd let her walk away. He'll come, she realized. And he'll do something terrible. Let me call him. Her voice was steady. I can convince him to cooperate. That's the plan. The man produced a phone. But first, a little demonstration. To show him we're serious. He nodded to one of the other men. The pain that followed lasted long enough to teach her what terror really felt like. The call came at 6:47 a.m. Woo Jin was in his office, hadn't left it since Moreo had walked out, staring at reports he couldn't process, coffee he couldn't drink, a world that had lost its color. The phone rang. Unknown number. Chairman Kim. An unfamiliar voice. We have something of yours. His blood turned to ice. If you've hurt her. Listen. A sound came through the speaker, muffled, pained. Moreo crying out. Woo Jin's hand crushed the phone's casing, plastic cracking under the pressure. What do you want? The demands were predictable. Data, money, humiliation. The tools of cowards who couldn't win through strength. He memoized every word. Then he said, very quietly, I want you to understand something. What's that? There is no version of this where you survive. He ended the call. Within an hour, Hanjin's private security forces were mobilized. Within 2 hours, satellite imagery had narrowed the location to an industrial district in Incheon. Within 3 hours, Woo Jin was dressed in black tactical gear, leading a team of 12 men toward a warehouse that would soon become a tomb. Sejin tried to stop him. You're the chairman of a billion-dollar company. You can't just. Watch me. Woo Jin. They hurt her. The words came out fractured, raw. They made her scream. And I'm going to make sure they never hurt anyone again. His eyes were empty of everything except purpose. Sejin stepped back. Bring her home, she whispered. I will. Or die trying. The thought didn't frighten him. Nothing frightened him anymore, not since he'd heard Moreo's voice on that call and felt his heart split in two. The warehouse was heavily guarded. 6 men outside. Unknown number within. Multiple entry points, all compromised. Woo Jin's team took positions in silence. They moved with lethal precision, former military, current mercenaries, men who'd sworn loyalty to the Kim family and meant it. The outer guards fell without a sound. Then Woo Jin kicked in the main door, and hell erupted. Gunfire. Shouting. The controlled chaos of violence he'd learned to navigate years ago. He moved through it like smoke, every movement economical, every shot precise. The snake tattoo on his neck seemed to pulse with each heartbeat. Find her. Find her. Find her. He cleared room after room, stepping over bodies, ignoring the blood that spattered his clothes. The third room. The door was locked from the inside. He shot the lock and kicked it open. And there she was. Moreo sat bound to a chair, face bruised, lips split, blood matting her beautiful hair. But alive. Alive. She looked up at him through swollen eyes, and something between a sob and a laugh escaped her throat. Took you long enough. Woo Jin crossed the room in 3 strides, falling to his knees before her, hands trembling as he worked at the ropes. I'm sorry. The words tore from him. I'm so sorry. I should have kept you closer. I should have. Woo Jin. He looked up. Her eyes met his, pain and terror and something else, something that looked impossibly like forgiveness. Get me out of here. The rest was cleanup. 3 men survived, bound and tagged for interrogation. The scarred man, the leader, did not. Woo Jin had made sure of that personally. The medical team met them at the car, treating Moreo's injuries with practiced efficiency. None were serious, bruises, a split lip, a shallow cut. She'd been hurt to send a message, not to cause permanent damage. The message had been received. Woo Jin sat beside her in the back of the sedan, holding her hand, feeling her pulse beat against his fingers, steady, alive, real. I'm sorry, he said again. Stop apologizing. I can't. His voice cracked. I promised to protect you, and I failed. You came for me. She turned to face him, her battered face somehow radiant. You came, and you. She stopped, eyes widening as she took in his appearance. You're covered in blood. None of it's mine. How many? Enough. She studied him for a long moment, this man who had destroyed her family, stalked her for years, and then torn through a warehouse full of armed men to bring her home. I'm not afraid of you, she said quietly. Maybe you should be. Maybe. She reached up, her fingers brushing his jaw. But I'm not. And that scares me more than anything else. He leaned into her touch like a man starving for contact. I love you. The words fell out without planning, without strategy, without control. I love you, and I've probably loved you for years, and I don't know how to be the man you deserve, but I want to try. I want. Moreo kissed him. It was different from the kisses before, softer, despite her split lip. Deliberate. A choice rather than an impulse. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with tears. Yes. Yes what? Yes, I'll marry you. Her voice was steady despite the trembling. Not because you'll protect me. Not because I have nowhere else to go. But because somehow, in the middle of all this chaos, you've become my home too. Woojin couldn't speak. For the first time in 10 years, his eyes filled with tears. He pulled her close, careful of her injuries, and buried his face in her hair. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you, thank you. Just don't make me regret it. I'll spend every day making sure you don't. Outside the car windows, the city lights of Seoul began to blur as they drove toward a future neither of them had planned, but both of them were finally ready to build. The weeks that followed were not easy. Moreo's physical injuries healed quickly, but the nightmares took longer. She woke screaming, some nights, trapped in memories of the warehouse. The pain, the fear, the certainty that she was going to die alone. Woojin was there every time. He never complained about the interrupted sleep. Never suggested she see a doctor. Never tried to fix what wasn't his to fix. He just held her. Sometimes until dawn, listening to her breathe, the snake tattoo pressed against her cheek like a strange comfort. The engagement wasn't announced. Too soon, Woojin said. The threats aren't fully neutralized. And your mother deserves to know before the public does. So they lived in a strange limbo, together, committed, but hidden from the world. Moreo used the time to heal in other ways. She read through the rest of the documentation about her father, not to torture herself, but to understand. The man who'd carried her on his shoulders had also destroyed lives. Both truths could exist. Both truths could be mourned. She wrote letters to her mother, not to send, but to process. Explaining what she'd learned. Asking questions she'd never get to ask her father. And she learned about Woojin. Not the chairman. Not the monster. The man underneath. He'd studied art history before taking over the company. Had wanted to be a professor, once. His favorite food was simple, kimchi jjigae, the kind his grandmother made before she died. He laughed rarely, but when he did, his entire face transformed. She fell deeper in love with each discovery. But she also saw the darkness. The calls he took late at night, his voice going flat and cold as he gave orders she didn't want to imagine. The files that arrived with security briefings, photographs of threats neutralized, problems eliminated, loose ends tied. He was building a world where she would be safe. And that world was built on blood. Does it bother you? She asked one night, curled against him in the massive bed. What you've done? Which parts? Any of it. All of it. He was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes, he admitted. Late at night, I think about who I might have been if Songho had lived. Softer, maybe. More hopeful. Someone who built things instead of destroying them. Do you wish you could go back? No. His arm tightened around her. Because going back would mean never finding you. And I can't, his voice caught. I can't imagine a life where you don't exist. That's a lot of pressure. You can handle it. She laughed softly against his chest. How do you know? Because you've handled everything else. He pressed a kiss to her hair. You're the strongest person I know. Even stronger than me. That's definitely not true. It's absolutely true. He pulled back to look at her. I control things because I'm afraid of losing them. You survived losing everything and rebuilt yourself anyway. That strength I can only dream of. Moreo stared at him, heart aching. This man, this complicated, terrifying, deeply broken man, saw her more clearly than anyone ever had. I love you, she said. I know. Say it back. His lips curved into that rare, transformative smile. I love you. More than control. More than revenge. More than anything I've ever wanted in my life. They came together then, slowly and tenderly, the world falling away until nothing existed but the two of them. Fade to black. 3 months after the rescue, they traveled to Nigeria. The village outside Port Harcourt was small, a collection of modest houses surrounding a central market, goats wandering the dusty paths, children's laughter echoing from the schoolyard. Moreo's mother lived in a white-painted house at the village edge, surrounded by gardens she'd planted herself. Adiz Aluko. Once the wife of a powerful diplomat. Now a simple woman who grew vegetables and taught English to village children. Moreo had called ahead, but nothing prepared her for the moment her mother opened the door. 8 years. 8 years since they'd seen each other. The woman in the doorway was older, grayed, but her eyes, those warm, knowing eyes, were exactly as Moreo remembered. My daughter. The words broke something open in Moreo's chest. She fell into her mother's arms and wept. Woojin waited outside, giving them privacy. An hour passed before Moreo emerged, eyes red, face peaceful in a way he'd never seen. She wants to meet you. Are you sure? She knows everything. I told her. Moreo took his hand. She wants to meet the man who destroyed her husband. And saved her daughter. Woojin's jaw tightened. This was the moment he'd dreaded, facing the woman whose life he'd devastated, asking for permission to marry her daughter. But he followed Moreo inside. Adiz Aluko sat in a chair by the window, sunlight falling across her face, watching him with eyes that saw too much. So, she said. You are Kim Woojin. Yes, You killed my husband. I destroyed his reputation. His death. Woojin chose his words carefully. I didn't order it. But my actions led to it. And now you want to marry my daughter? Yes. Why? It was the same question Moreo had asked, weeks ago. But now Woojin had a better answer. Because she makes me believe I can be more than what I've become. His voice was raw. I've spent my life trying to control everything, and failing. With her, I don't need control. I just need her to choose me. Every day. Adiz studied him for a long moment. Then she rose, crossed the room, and took his face in her weathered hands. My husband was not a good man, she said quietly. I knew it for years before the world did. I stayed because I was afraid. Because I didn't know who I was without him. Her eyes held his. You gave me freedom. Even if you gave it through destruction. And you gave my daughter a reason to stop running. Woojin couldn't speak. You have my blessing. Adiz released him. But if you hurt her. I won't. If you hurt her, she continued, I will find a way to make you suffer. Do you understand? Yes, Adiz nodded once. Then she smiled, a warm, unexpected smile that reminded him painfully of Sung-ho. Welcome to the family, Kim Woojin. The announcement came 6 months after Nigeria. Hanjin Group chairman to wed Nigerian businesswoman. The headlines exploded across Korean media, then international. Speculation ran rampant. Who was this mysterious woman? Where had she come from? Why had the most eligible bachelor in Asia chosen someone outside the typical circles? Moreo watched the coverage from Woojin's office, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. They're calling me a gold digger. Woojin didn't look up from his laptop. They called my mother worse when she married my father. That's not comforting. It's not meant to be. He closed the laptop and crossed to where she sat today. It's meant to remind you that public opinion is irrelevant. What matters is what we know. And what do we know? He crouched before her, taking the cold tea from her hands and setting it aside. That you're the strongest woman I've ever met. That you survived things that would have destroyed anyone else. That you chose me, his voice caught. Even knowing what I am. Moreo touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. The press conference is tomorrow. I know. They'll ask about my father. I know that too. His eyes met hers. We tell the truth. All of it. Your father's crimes. My brother's death. Everything that led us here. That's insane. Your reputation is less important than yours. He turned his head, pressing a kiss to her palm. I won't have you spend our marriage defending yourself against rumors. The truth is complicated, but it's ours. Let them judge. Moreo stared at him. This man who had spent his entire adult life controlling narratives, managing perception, keeping secrets, he was willing to expose everything. For her. You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. The Hanjin Grand Hotel ballroom was transformed. Where once champagne had flowed and auctions had been held, now rows of chairs faced a raised platform. Cameras lined the back wall. Journalists from every major outlet clutched recorders and notebooks, hungry for the story of the decade. Moreo stood backstage, heart hammering. The red hanbok she wore was similar to the one from the family ball, but this one was designed for combat. Armored silk, her mother had called it when she'd helped choose the design. Something to make you feel invincible. She didn't feel invincible. She felt terrified. Ready. Woojin appeared beside her, resplendent in a black suit, the snake tattoo visible above his collar. He'd chosen not to hide it, another statement, another piece of truth laid bare. No. Neither am I. He took her hand. But we'll be terrified together. The doors opened. They walked out to face the world. The questions came like bullets. Chairman Kim, how did you meet Miss Aluko? Is it true she worked as a caterer at one of your events? Miss Aluko, what is your response to allegations that you targeted Chairman Kim for his wealth? Can you confirm reports that your father was involved in illegal activities? Woojin fielded the first volley with his usual precision, calm, controlled, revealing nothing. Then he departed from the script. I want to address the speculation directly. His voice carried across the silent room. Moreo Aluko and I met under unusual circumstances. She was working as event staff at a Hanjin function. I noticed her. I singled her out. And that's where the story most people know begins. He paused. But our true connection started years earlier. With a crime. And a death. And a revenge that consumed most of my adult life. The journalists leaned forward. Moreo's father, Chief Adebayo Aluko, was a Nigerian diplomat. He was also involved in illegal smuggling operations that resulted in the death of my half-brother, Park Sung-ho. Gasps rippled through the room. I spent years gathering evidence. Building a case. Destroying Chief Aluko's reputation and assets. His death, while not directly caused by my actions, was a consequence of the pressure I brought to bear. Cameras flashed. In the process, I devastated an innocent family. Moreo and her mother lost everything. Their home, their security, their place in the world. They spent years in hiding, in poverty, in fear. Woojin's hand tightened around Moreo's. I watched Moreo from a distance for years. Telling myself it was obligation. Guilt. Duty to repair what I'd broken. But the truth, he turned to look at her. The truth is that somewhere along the way, I fell in love with the woman she became. Not despite her suffering, but because of the strength she showed in surviving it. Silence. Then Moreo stepped forward. My father was not a good man. Her voice was steady. I spent years mourning him as a victim. Learning the truth was devastating. But it was also freeing. She faced the cameras. Kim Woojin took everything from my family. And then he spent years trying to give something back, not through guilt, but through genuine care. Protection. And eventually, love. She looked at him. I'm not marrying him because he's powerful. I'm marrying him because he's the only person who's ever seen me clearly, the princess I was, the survivor I became, and the woman I'm still learning to be. Her voice softened. He's not perfect. Neither am I. But we're choosing each other. Every day. And that's the only truth that matters. The press conference became legendary. Not for the scandal, though there was plenty of that, but for the raw honesty of it. Two people standing before the world, refusing to hide behind carefully crafted narratives. The public response was divided. Some called it the most romantic thing they'd ever witnessed. Others questioned Woojin's morality, Moreo's motives, the entire foundation of their relationship. Neither of them cared. They walked out of that ballroom hand in hand, and the weight that had pressed against Moreo's chest for months finally lifted. The truth is ours. Let them judge. The ceremony took place on a private island in the Philippines, the same island that had been auctioned at the charity gala a lifetime ago. Woojin had purchased it the day after the auction. For you, he'd said when he'd shown her the deed. A place where no one can reach us. Where we can just be. The guest list was small: Sujin, Adiz, a handful of trusted associates from Hanjin. No press. No spectators. No one who didn't genuinely wish them well. Moreo wore white. Not a Western gown, but a fusion piece, Nigerian lace meeting Korean silk, tradition blending with modernity. Her mother had helped design it, working with Seoul's finest dressmakers to create something that honored both halves of her heritage. The pendant hung at her throat, gleaming gold against her collarbone. Woojin waited at the altar, an archway of native flowers overlooking the sea. His suit was white as well, a departure from his eternal black, the snake tattoo stark and unashamed against his neck. When Moreo appeared at the end of the aisle, escorted by her mother, he stopped breathing. She's real, he thought. After everything, she's real, and she's choosing me. The vows were traditional Korean, blended with Nigerian blessings Adiz had prepared. But when the officiant asked if they had personal words to add, both of them spoke. Moreo first. I spent 8 years learning to be invisible. To disappear into walls, into crowds, into my own silence. You saw me anyway. You saw me when I didn't want to be seen. When I was angry. When I was broken. When I tried to push you away. Her voice trembled. You're impossible. Infuriating. Terrifying. And the best thing that ever happened to me. She took his hand. I promise to keep seeing you too. The chairman. The monster. The man underneath. All of it. Forever. Then Woojin. I built my life on control. On revenge. On the certainty that I knew exactly what I needed and how to get it. You destroyed all of that. You walked into my world and made me question everything I thought I understood about myself. His voice was raw. I don't deserve you. I know that. But I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become someone who does. He lifted her hand to his lips. I promise to protect you. Not because you're weak, you're the strongest person I know, but because protecting you is the only way I know how to say what you mean to me. The officiant smiled. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Woojin kissed her like the world was ending. And in a way, it was. The old world, the one built on secrets and surveillance and carefully maintained distance, collapsed in that moment. What rose from its ashes was something new. Something theirs. 1 year later. The apartment in Hanjin Tower had been transformed. No longer a gilded cage, but a home, filled with art from both their heritages, photographs of their wedding, a small garden on the balcony where Moreo grew herbs the way her mother had taught her. She still had nightmares sometimes. But they came less frequently now, and when they did, Woojin was always there. The threats had been neutralized, every last one. Victor Okonkwo had provided information in exchange for a reduced sentence. The remaining members of her father's network had been dismantled, scattered, rendered harmless. For the first time in nearly a decade, Moreo could walk down the street without looking over her shoulder. It was strange. Disorienting. Wonderful. You're thinking too hard. She looked up from her book. Woojin stood in the doorway, tie loosened, jacket discarded, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. How can you tell? Your forehead does this thing. He crossed to the couch and sat beside her. Little wrinkle. Right here. He pressed a kiss to the spot. I was thinking about how strange it is, she admitted. To be safe. To be happy. To have, she gestured at the apartment, at him, at everything. This. Does it feel unearned? Sometimes. It shouldn't. He pulled her close, tucking her against his chest. You survived things that would have broken anyone else. You chose to trust me when every rational instinct said not to. You earned this. So did you. He was quiet for a moment. I'm still working on believing that. I know. She tilted her head up to look at him. We'll work on it together. That night, they attended a gallery opening. Not a Hanjin event, something smaller, more personal. A young Nigerian Korean artist whose work Moreo had discovered and championed. They walked through the exhibition together, Moreo explaining the cultural references, Woojin listening with genuine interest. "This one," she said, stopping before a large canvas. "This is my favorite." The painting depicted two figures, one rendered in shades of gold, the other in deepest black, intertwined so thoroughly that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. The title card read, "Collision." "It's us," Woojin said quietly. "That's what I thought too." They stood in silence, studying the image. "I want to buy it," he said. "For the apartment. For our children someday." He turned to look at her. "So they'll understand." Moreo's breath caught. Children. They hadn't discussed it, not seriously. The idea felt distant, hypothetical, something for a future she hadn't dared to imagine. But standing here, looking at this painting, feeling the steady warmth of his hand in hers. "Okay," she said. "Okay. Buy it. For our children." She smiled up at him. "Someday." His eyes lit with something she'd only seen glimpses of before, hope, uncomplicated and pure. "Someday," he agreed. 5 years later. The Hanjin Grand Hotel ballroom looked exactly as it had the night they'd met. The same chandeliers. The same marble floors. The same air of wealth and power and carefully curated elegance. But everything else had changed. Moreo stood at the top of the staircase, wearing a red gown that flowed like water, her mother's pendant gleaming at her throat. Beside her, Woojin held their daughter, 3 years old, already fierce, a perfect blend of Korean precision and Nigerian warmth. The charity gala below was different now. Not just Hanjin donors, but representatives from foundations across Africa and Asia. Not just art auctions, but initiatives Moreo had designed, scholarships for displaced children, support programs for women rebuilding their lives. The invisible woman had become a force. "Ready?" Woojin murmured. Moreo looked down at the crowd, at Sejin laughing with a group of young artists, at her mother deep in conversation with a Korean minister's wife, at the dozens of faces that no longer looked through her but looked up to her. Yes. They descended together. And this time, when every eye in the room turned toward them, Moreo didn't flinch. She belonged here. Not because of Woojin's name or his power, but because she'd earned her place. Through survival. Through love. Through the choice to stop running and start building. The gala was a triumph. Donations exceeded every projection. New partnerships formed. Lives were changed, not through the cold machinery of wealth, but through the warm, complicated work of human connection. By midnight, most guests had departed. Moreo stood at the window, looking out at the Seoul skyline, feeling the strange peace that came from circles finally closing. Arms wrapped around her from behind. "I thought you'd be tired," Woojin murmured against her hair. "I am. But it's a good tired. You were magnificent tonight. You helped. I wrote checks. You changed minds." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "There's a difference." She turned in his arms, looking up at the face she'd learned to read over 5 years of marriage. The sharp jaw, the controlled expressions, the darkness behind his eyes that never fully disappeared but had learned to share space with light. "I love you." "I know." "Say it back." That rare, transformative smile. "I love you. More than control. More than revenge. More than anything I've ever wanted in my life." The same words he'd said years ago. But fuller now. Richer. Proved true by the life they'd built together. "Take me home," Moreo said. "Which one? The apartment? The island?" She considered. "The island. I want to wake up to the ocean tomorrow." Done. They left Seoul that night, flying private to the Philippine island that had become their refuge, a place where no one could reach them, where they could just be. Their daughter slept between them on the plane, small hands clutching both their fingers. Moreo watched her breathe. This is real, she thought. This impossible, terrifying, beautiful life, it's real. Woojin caught her eye across their daughter's sleeping form. No words were needed. They understood each other, the wounds they'd caused, the healing they'd built, the love that had grown in the space between obsession and trust. The plane descended toward the island. Below them, the sea glittered under a full moon. And ahead of them stretched a future neither of them had dared to imagine, but both of them had chosen. Every day. Forever. 10 years later. The Seoul Museum of Cultural Convergence unveiled its newest permanent exhibition, Roots and Roots, African Art in the Asian Century. At the center of the collection stood a bronze Benin plaque, a warrior figure, intricate and proud, once owned by Chief Adebayo Aluko. The placard beside it read, "On permanent loan from the Kim Aluko family collection. In memory of Park Sung-ho and Chief Adebayo Aluko, 2 lives lost, one to violence and one to its consequences. May their stories remind us that justice and mercy can coexist, and that healing is always possible." Moreo stood before the plaque, alone. She was 42 now, grey threading through her hair, laugh lines around her eyes, the pendant still gleaming at her throat. "You look like you're thinking too hard." She turned. Woojin stood behind her, 52, distinguished, the snake tattoo faded but still visible above his collar. Time had softened him in ways neither of them had expected. He smiled more easily now. Laughed without reservation. Loved without the armor that had once defined him. "I was thinking about my father." "Good thoughts or bad?" "Both." She looked back at the plaque. "He was a monster. He was also my father. I don't think I'll ever fully reconcile those two truths." "Maybe you're not supposed to." Woojin moved to stand beside her. "Maybe some things just stay complicated forever." "That's unusually philosophical for you." "I'm growing in my old age." She laughed, leaning into him. Their daughter, 13 now, brilliant and fierce, appeared around the corner with her younger brother in tow. "Mom. Dad. Can we go? The exhibit's amazing," but Jinwoo tried to touch a sculpture and a guard yelled at him. "I was just looking." Jinwoo protested, 7 years old and already developing his father's stubborn jaw. Moreo shared a look with Woojin. "This is our life. This impossible, terrifying, beautiful life. 5 more minutes," she said. "Then we'll go get tteokbokki." The children cheered and disappeared again. Woojin reached for her hand. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Twice. But I don't mind hearing it again." "I love you." He raised her hand to his lips. "More than control. More than." "I know the speech." She smiled. "I love you too." They stood together before the plaque, the evidence of old sins, old grief, old wounds that had somehow healed into something stronger. The snake and the eagle. The controlled storm and the invisible woman. 2 people who never should have met, who should have been enemies, who had instead become each other's home. Forever. Thank you for reading this story of obsession, survival, and love that crosses every boundary. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more dark romance narratives that explore the complicated spaces between power and vulnerability, control and surrender, hatred and love. Until next time.